Hey, welcome back to the Retro Bart Show. On today's episode, we're talking about limit-pushing 3D games on the Super Nintendo. So you might think Nintendo started their 3D game making with the Nintendo 64 in 1996, but that would just be wrong. Because 3 years prior, in 1993, Nintendo made a little game called Star Fox, which used a coprocessor to perform 3D polygonal graphics. 3D games such as Star Fox were not really seen on home consoles throughout the 80s and early 90s, but the few exceptions to that were pretty bad games, and usually the developers focused on graphics over gameplay. The Super Nintendo could perform 3D polygonal graphics, but not that many, like in the Intro to Zelda. But there was other ways it could do something that's like 3D. These forms can be seen in games such as F-Zero with its Mode 7 3D racetracks, and Pilot Wings, which also use Mode 7 to have the 3D-like areas you can fly around in. And it also could have first-person shooters such as Wolfenstein 3D, which used a raycaster to make its 3D hallways. But like I said, it isn't real 3D, which brings us to Argonaut Software, who, without permission from Nintendo, developed a 3D demo for the original Game Boy. The DMG one with the green screen. That one can do 3D, surprisingly. Nintendo spotted them, and instead of getting in trouble, they got to make the Super FX chip. The Super FX chip is a coprocessor that can render 3D polygons and helps with advanced 2D effects such as sprite scaling, which is why Yoshi's Island has it. A total of 8 games released for the original Super FX chip, and its predecessor, the Super FX2, was released later down the line to do even more stuff, bettery. So let's take a look at these limit-pushing Super Nintendo games. The first game on the list is the first game to use the Super FX chip. Star Fox is a 3D space shooter that stars Fox McCloud on his journeys across space to save Corania from the evil monkey guy Andross. The game is very linear, which helped the Super FX chip with its graphics. The game has impressive 3D landscapes, but not as impressive as some other games on this list. One drawback is the low frame rate, which is something that most Super FX games share. The reason for this is the SNES and a lot of consoles from the early 90s, 80s, and even some consoles from the early 2000s, like the Game Boy Advance, used tile-based graphics, which are great for 2D games, but are piss poor for games that have to update every frame, like 3D games. Next up is everyone's favorite game, and probably the most ported game ever made, Gex. Nah, I'm joking, it's Doom. This version of Doom has pretty good and playable frame rates and graphics, and a good representation of the original soundtrack. It is better than 3DO Doom. The controls are pretty good, as you could they're as good as you can get from a controller with no triggers or analog sticks. Just a D-pad, some buttons, and shoulder buttons. It's overall worse compared to the PC and DOS versions of the game, and there's no real reasons to play this version unless you have a SNES and want to play Doom on it. And it's the best option for that. In fact, I think it's probably the only option for that. Next up is a game you might mistake for a Nintendo 64 game, Stunt Race FX. Many people don't like Stunt Race FX for its low frame rate and not great controls, but if you look past it, it's a pretty good game. It shares many similarities with Mario 64, which makes me think that it might be a testing ground for that game and other 64-bit racing games made by Nintendo. Stunt Race FX has really good 3D graphics and fun gameplay that you can even overclock to have run at higher frame rates. The next game on the list is Vortex, which is actually made by the creators of the Super FX chip, Argonaut Software. Oh yeah, I talked about those guys earlier, remember? It's a 3D space shooter that has a lot of similarities with Star Fox, which Argonaut helped make, but unlike Star Fox, you can transform into some mech spaceship thing, or vice versa. Star Fox does this later down the line. It does have the worst frame rate of the bunch though. Next is Star Fox 2. Star Fox 2 was cancelled and never released until it was finally released on the SNES Mini and later in Switch Online. It's much like Star Fox, but with more open world spaces, and you can now even become a mech, just like in Vortex, and walk around, which is pretty fun gameplay mechanic that they never went back and did on any other games in the Star Fox franchise. Out of every game on this list, you should probably play this one because it's a darn good game. In fact, it wasn't released in the 90s because Nintendo thought that it would hurt sales of their upcoming console, the Nintendo 64. That's one rumor. Or that it would not compare to anything like the PlayStation. No one really knows, except Nintendo. Next up is the European exclusive game, Winter Gold, which has very impressive graphics, and sometimes looks like a PS1 or Nintendo 64 game. It has like cutscenes and stuff. It's like it's really cool. Like, look at it. Look. Are you looking? Okay, good. It's a combination of camera trickery and backdrops give it a cool graphical art style, and was released very late in the Super Nintendo's life, so it's pretty niche. Oh, you watched till the end of the video? Oh, thanks a lot. Subscribe to Retrobytes278 and like the video, I guess. Wow, I can't believe you watched till the end. Hi, Brendan. Oh, that's all we have for today's episode. Bye.